I still remember the exact weight of the grocery bags digging into my palms that Tuesday evening. It was the kind of mundane detail that your brain latches onto later, when you're trying to piece together the exact moment your entire world tilted off its axis. I had two bags, one with a carton of eggs I was terrified of breaking, and the other with a rotisserie chicken, some bagged salad, and a six-pack of craft beer I'd picked up as a peace offering. I'd been gone for 3 days, a last-minute work trip to Houston that had stretched into 4 because of weather, and I felt this low hum of guilt in my chest the whole flight back. My son Leo had just turned 18, and we'd been doing this awkward dance for the last year, a push and pull where I was trying to hold on tight while also letting him figure out who he was. He was a good kid, smart, quiet in that intense way that made you wonder what was going on behind his eyes, and he'd been moodier than usual lately. I thought maybe it was just senior year stress, college applications, the usual stuff. I thought a lot of things back then. I unlocked the door to our 2-bedroom condo in Silver Lake, the one I'd worked double shifts at the hospital to afford after the divorce, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't just the stale, closed-up air of an empty apartment. It was something else, a mix of sweat, cheap cologne, and a cloying sweetness that I couldn't immediately place. I called out his name, Leo. "I'm home," my voice sounding weirdly loud in the quiet space. The living room was a mess, which wasn't entirely unusual, but there was a pile of clothes on the floor that weren't his. A black hoodie, a pair of women's sneakers I didn't recognize. My stomach did a little flip, a flicker of irritation mixed with a mother's instinct to know everything that was happening under her roof. I assumed he had friends over, maybe a girl he was too embarrassed to tell me about. I was actually kind of relieved. For a while, I'd been worried he was too introverted, spending too much time in his room playing video games. I set the bags on the kitchen counter, the rotisserie chicken already cooling in its plastic tomb, and I remember feeling this weird mix of exhaustion and the hollow excitement of being home. I was still wearing my travel clothes, a wrinkled blazer and slacks that felt stiff after a day of airports. All I wanted was to shower, change into my softest pajama pants, and eat dinner with my son while he pretended to listen to me talk about my trip. I walked down the short hallway toward the bedrooms, the carpet plush under my tired feet. The door to Leo's room was ajar, but the room was dark. I could hear the muffled sound of music coming from inside, some kind of bass-heavy, moody indie rock that all his friends listened to. I was about to knock, to let him know I was back and to tell him to clean up the living room when I heard it. A low, male groan and then a soft, feminine laugh. I froze. My hand, which had been raised to knock, fell back to my side. My first thought was incredibly stupid. It was the thought of a mother who sees her son as a child, who still pictures him with chocolate smeared on his face from a birthday cake. I thought, he's watching a movie, that's a movie sound. But the laugh came again, followed by a hushed whisper I couldn't make out. The door wasn't fully closed, it was pushed to, but there was a half-inch gap where the door didn't quite meet the frame. I should have walked away. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to walk back to the kitchen, to clatter some pots and pans, to make my presence known so that whatever was happening in there would stop, and my son could compose himself. And I could pretend I didn't know he was having a girl over. But I didn't walk away. There was something else in that laugh, a familiarity that tugged at a thread in the back of my mind, something that made my blood run cold before I even understood why. I leaned forward, my breath held tight in my chest, and I peered through the crack. The light in the room was dim, just a desk lamp casting a yellowish glow across the bed. My eyes took a second to adjust. I saw Leo first. He was standing near the foot of the bed, shirtless, his skinny frame silhouetted. His back was to me, and he was fumbling with his belt buckle. My heart lurched in my chest, a violent, sickening thud. I looked away instinctively, my eyes squeezing shut for a second as a wave of nausea and embarrassment washed over me. Jesus, I breathed out, the words silent on my lips. I was about to turn away to finally do the right thing and just leave when I heard the girl's voice again, clear and playful. "Come on, slowpoke," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "We don't have all night. Your mom will be home in a few hours." It was the voice that shattered my world. The casual, intimate tone. The way she said "your mom" with this conspiratorial, almost mocking affection. I knew that voice. I had heard it 1,000 times, over glasses of wine on my back porch, in the passenger seat of my car on road trips to Santa Barbara, in the hollow silence of late-night phone calls when I was crying over the divorce. It was the voice of my best friend. It was Chloe, the same Chloe who had called me from the airport 3 nights ago, her voice shaky and her words tumbling over each other, begging me to let her stay at my place, because she'd had a huge fight with her boyfriend, Mark, and needed a few days to figure things out. The same Chloe who I'd told to make herself at home, to use the spare key under the flower pot, and who had hugged me so tight at the airport I could feel her heart beating against my own. The same Chloe who, for the last 2 years, had been the only person who made me feel like I wasn't a complete failure at being a woman, at being a mother, at being anything at all. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body had turned to stone. I watched as my son, my baby boy, finally got his belt unbuckled and let his jeans fall to the floor, leaving him in just a pair of dark boxer briefs. Then he turned around and he was looking directly at the woman on the bed. The light fell on her face and my heart stopped. It was Chloe. My Chloe. She was lying on his bed, propped up on her elbows, wearing one of my old, oversized band t-shirts, the one I'd left in the guest room. Her dark hair was splayed out on his pillow, and she had this lazy, seductive smile on her face that I'd never seen before, a look that belonged to a stranger. The music in the room pulsed, and time seemed to warp into a slow, gelatinous crawl. I watched, paralyzed, as Leo, my 18-year-old son, did something completely unexpected. He didn't crawl onto the bed with her. Instead, he reached down, grabbed the hem of his boxers, and with a deliberate, theatrical slowness, he stripped them off. He just stood there, completely naked in front of her. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp that felt like it could tear my throat open. I saw her eyes travel down his body, a slow, appreciative appraisal that made me want to vomit. I saw her reach out a hand, a casual, practiced gesture, and run her fingers along his thigh. It was a gesture so intimate, so possessive, that it felt like a physical slap across my own face. He said something, his voice low and mumbling, a phrase I couldn't quite catch. She laughed, a breathy, intimate sound. This wasn't a stupid kid getting caught fooling around with a girl from school. This was something else. This was my son, a legal adult but still a child in my mind, having some sort of sordid, secretive moment with a woman who was 10 years older than him. A woman I had trusted with my heart, my secrets, my son. The betrayal was so vast, so profound, that my mind simply refused to process it. It wasn't just the sex, the sheer, mind-bending wrongness of the age gap and the breach of trust. It was the intimacy. It was the casual way she touched him, the familiar way she talked about me. It was the way he looked at her, not like a boy, but like a man in the presence of a woman he worshipped. Then, the most chilling part of the entire scene unfolded. Chloe propped herself up on her knees on the bed, her face level with Leo's. She looked him directly in the eyes, her expression shifting from playful to something else, something serious and dark. She placed a hand on his cheek, a tender, almost maternal gesture that sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. And then she spoke, her voice low but loud enough for me to hear through the crack in the door. "You look just like your father," she said. "When he was younger, it's so strange, but better, you're so much better." A chill, colder than any winter wind, ran down my spine. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It was as if I was watching a disaster movie from the inside, my own life crumbling in slow motion. I was still wearing my travel clothes, holding a bag with eggs and a chicken. I was a normal woman coming home from a normal trip, and I had just stumbled into a nightmare. I stumbled back from the door, my shoulder hitting the wall with a soft thud. I couldn't breathe. I felt like my chest was caving in, the air turning to lead in my lungs. The woman in the room who looked like my best friend wasn't my best friend. She had transformed into a predator. And the man in the room who looked like my son wasn't my son. He was a stranger, a pawn in some twisted game I didn't understand. I had to get out of there. I couldn't look at them anymore. I turned, my legs feeling like they were made of rubber, and I shuffled back down the hallway, away from the scene of the crime, my mind a blank white wall of shock. I made it to the kitchen on autopilot. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to set the grocery bags down on the counter twice before they actually stayed put. The rotisserie chickens slid to one side, and the eggs rattled in their cardboard carton. I remember staring at my own reflection in the dark window above the sink, and I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and hollow, her mouth slightly open like she was about to speak, but had forgotten all the words. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard that my knuckles went white, and I focused on the sensation of the cold granite beneath my fingertips, trying to anchor myself to something real. The music from Leo's room was still thrumming through the walls, a low, insistent beat that felt like a second heartbeat, a mocking counterpoint to the frantic pounding in my own chest. I couldn't hear their voices anymore, which meant they were either being quiet or they had moved on to something I absolutely did not want to imagine. My brain kept cycling through the same images like a broken record. Leo stripped bare, Chloe's hand on his thigh, the way she'd said his name, the way she'd compared him to his father. That last part was the sharpest knife, the one that kept twisting deeper every time I thought about it. My ex-husband David, we'd been divorced for 6 years, and I'd spent most of that time trying to erase him from my mental landscape. He was a handsome man, charming in that effortless, infuriating way that made everyone forgive him for his flaws. He'd left me for a younger woman, a classic midlife crisis cliché that had gutted me at the time. I'd cried on Chloe's shoulder about it for months, and she'd listened to every word, held my hand, and told me I deserved better. She'd been my rock through the darkest days of my life, the person who showed up at my door with takeout and wine, the one who helped me pack up David's things when he finally moved out, the one who promised me that I would survive. And now she was in my son's bedroom, comparing him to the man who had broken my heart. The irony was so grotesque that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I just stood there in my dark kitchen, trembling, while my entire reality dissolved around me. I needed to do something. I couldn't just stand there like a statue forever. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through nursing school and a messy divorce and single motherhood, finally kicked in and started issuing orders. Leave. Just leave. Walk out the front door, get in your car, and drive somewhere anywhere. Figure out what to do when you're not standing in the middle of a crime scene. But my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, trapped by my own shock. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, light and quick, and my heart seized up. I had about 3 seconds to decide what to do, and my body made the choice for me. I grabbed the carton of eggs and dropped it on the floor. The sound was spectacular, a wet, splattering crash that echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. I watched the yellow yolks bleed across the white tile, and I let out a sharp, theatrical gasp, the kind of sound you make when you're startled. It was a performance. I was performing for my own life. The footsteps stopped. I heard a muffled curse from Leo's room, then the frantic rustling of sheets and the thud of someone scrambling off a bed. I crouched down, my knees popping, and I started scooping up the broken eggshells with my bare hands, the slimy whites oozing between my fingers. The cold, viscous texture was grounding, disgusting but real. I heard the door to Leo's room open, and then the unmistakable sound of Chloe's voice, all soft concern and practiced sweetness. "Laura, oh my God, are you okay?" She was coming down the hallway. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the mess on the floor, because I knew if I looked up at her, I would lose it completely. I would scream or cry or worse, I would just fall apart right there in the middle of the kitchen and let her see exactly how broken I was. I wasn't ready for that. I needed to understand what was happening before I confronted it. "Laura, hey, talk to me." She was kneeling beside me now, her hand on my shoulder. The touch made my skin crawl, and I had to fight the urge to flinch away. She smelled like my perfume, the expensive one I kept in the guest bathroom. That detail, small and petty, felt like the final insult. "I'm fine," I said, my voice coming out weirdly flat and calm. "Just clumsy." I dropped the eggs. I finally looked up at her, and I saw her face up close for the first time since I'd entered the apartment. She looked exactly the same as she always did, beautiful in that effortless, girl-next-door way, with her dark eyes and her easy smile. There was nothing in her expression that suggested guilt or shame. She just looked concerned, the picture of a good friend helping another friend clean up a mess. It was chilling. I had always known Chloe was a good actress. She had to be. She worked in real estate and could sell a house to anyone, but I had never seen her perform for me before. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my best friend's face. "Here, let me help," she said, already reaching for a paper towel. "You must be exhausted. How was the trip?" The sheer mundanity of the question, delivered in the same tone she'd used to ask about the weather, made my head spin. She was just going to pretend nothing had happened. She was going to help me clean up the eggs, make small talk about Houston, and then go back to my son's bedroom like nothing was wrong. I watched her hands as they moved, efficient and practiced, picking up the largest chunks of shell and dumping them in the trash can under the sink. Her nails were painted a soft pink, and I remembered painting them for her 2 weeks ago, sitting on my back porch with a bottle of wine and a laugh that felt so distant now it belonged to another lifetime. I hated her. In that moment, the hatred was so pure and so fierce that it took my breath away. I wanted to grab her by her hair and smash her face into the tile floor. I wanted to scream at her until my voice gave out, but I didn't. I kept cleaning, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. Leo appeared in the doorway, fully dressed now, his face pale and guilty. He looked like a little boy who'd been caught sneaking cookies, not like a man who'd just been naked in front of a woman twice his age. "Mom, you're back early," he said, his voice cracking slightly. It was the stupidest thing he could have said, and I almost laughed again. Early? I wasn't early, I was right on time. Weather cleared up, I said, my voice still that flat, inhuman monotone. Got an earlier flight. I stood up, brushing egg residue off my pants. My hands were still shaking, and I shoved them in my pockets to hide it. Leo and Chloe were exchanging a look, a quick, furtive glance that I caught out of the corner of my eye. It was the look of co-conspirators, people who shared a secret that could destroy someone else. That was when the first crack appeared in my carefully constructed composure. The anger started to bleed through the shock, hot and acidic, burning a hole in my chest. Chloe stood up too, brushing off her jeans. She was wearing the clothes she'd arrived in, her dark wash denim and a simple white t-shirt like she'd just been waiting for me to come home. The band t-shirt from my bedroom was gone, hidden somewhere, evidence erased. "I was just about to head out," she said, her voice light and breezy. "I was keeping Leo company, you know how he gets when he's alone." She was lying. She was lying to my face, and she was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed her. For a split second, I actually questioned what I'd seen. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the exhaustion and the stress of the trip had conjured up some kind of fever dream, a twisted fantasy born of my own insecurities. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew the sound of her voice, the shape of her hand on my son's bare skin. I knew. "Thanks for keeping an eye on him," I said, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "I really appreciate it." Chloe smiled, that warm, reassuring smile that had always made me feel safe. It was a weapon now, a mask she wore to hide the monster underneath. "Anytime," she said. "You know I'm always here for you, for both of you." She leaned in and gave me a hug, and I stood there stiff and unresponsive, my arms pinned to my sides. She smelled like my perfume and my son, and I thought I was going to be sick. When she pulled back, she gave me one last smile, and then she walked to the door, grabbed her purse, and let herself out. The click of the lock was deafening in the silence that followed. Leo and I stood in the kitchen, alone for the first time since I'd come home. The egg mess was mostly cleaned up, but there was still a sticky residue on the tile that would need to be mopped. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his whole body radiating a desperate, teenage guilt. I stared at him, this boy I had raised, this boy I had breastfed and diapered and taught to ride a bike and held when he cried over his first heartbreak. And I saw a stranger with my son's face, who had just done something unforgivable. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All I could see was Chloe's hand on his thigh, and her voice telling him he was better than his father. I turned around and walked to my room, closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. The shock was starting to wear off, and in its place was a cold, creeping horror that settled into my bones. My son and my best friend. The two people I trusted most in the world had been lying to me, right under my own roof. I started to replay every interaction I'd had with Chloe over the last few months, looking for the clues I'd missed. The way she'd started coming over more often, the way she'd always ask about Leo, the way she'd laugh at his jokes a little too hard. I'd thought she was just being a good friend, taking an interest in my life. I'd been so blind, so stupid. I thought about all the nights she'd stayed over, sleeping in the guest room just down the hall from my son's room. I thought about the time I'd come home early from work and found them watching a movie together on the couch, their bodies a little too close. I'd dismissed it as nothing. I'd trusted them. The betrayal was a living thing inside me, coiling in my stomach, spreading its poison through my veins. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages with Chloe. There were dozens of them, a chronicle of our friendship stretching back years. Missing you, can't wait for our girls' night. You're the best friend a girl could ask for. Every word was a lie. Every emoji, every heart, every exclamation point was a mask she'd worn to hide her true intentions. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead I just held it, my thumb hovering over her contact photo, a picture of us at the beach last summer, our arms around each other, smiling at the camera. We looked so happy. We were so happy. And she had been plotting this, planning this for God knows how long. I scrolled further back, looking for any mention of David, any hint that she'd been interested in him back in the day. She'd always been dismissive of him, calling him a waste of space, saying I was better off without him. But I remembered the way she'd looked at him at parties sometimes, a lingering glance I'd written off as harmless. I remembered the way she'd defended him once, after the divorce, saying he wasn't all bad. I'd thought she was just being generous. Now I wondered if she'd been protecting a fantasy, a secret desire she'd kept hidden all these years. And then there was Leo, my son, the boy I had sacrificed so much for, the boy I had worked double shifts to support, who I'd stayed up with all night when he was sick, who I'd cheered on at soccer games and school plays. I had given him everything. I had loved him unconditionally, and he had repaid me with this. I knew he was young, I knew he was impressionable, but that didn't excuse it. He had made a choice. He had looked at Chloe, my best friend, and he had chosen her over me. The thought was like a knife in my chest. I wanted to go to his room and demand answers. I wanted to shake him until he told me the truth. I wanted to scream at him to make him understand the magnitude of what he'd done. But I was too tired, too broken, too numb. So I just sat there in the dark with my phone in my hand, and I let the silence swallow me whole. The next few days were a blur. I moved through my life like a ghost, going through the motions of work, of cooking, of pretending that everything was normal. Leo avoided me, disappearing into his room as soon as he got home from school, emerging only to grab food or use the bathroom. He didn't look me in the eye, he didn't ask me about my day. He just retreated further and further into himself, leaving a chasm between us that felt insurmountable. I didn't confront him. I didn't know how. I was waiting, I think, for the right moment, for a sign that he would come to me on his own and confess. But he never did. He just kept hiding, and I kept waiting, and the silence between us grew into something suffocating and unbearable. Chloe called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. She texted me a picture of a funny cat meme like nothing had happened. She texted me about a sale at our favorite boutique. She texted me to ask if I was okay because I seemed distant. The audacity of it made me sick. She was playing the part of the concerned friend, the same way she'd played the part of the helpful house guest. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every time I saw her name on my phone, I saw her hand on my son's thigh, and I wanted to throw up. I spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? My adult son had a consensual encounter with my adult friend. It wasn't a crime. It was just a betrayal. I thought about confronting Chloe, going to her apartment and screaming at her, slapping her across the face, making her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. But I knew it wouldn't help. It wouldn't undo what she'd done. It wouldn't make Leo forget. It wouldn't heal the wound that was festering inside me. I felt like I was drowning and no one could see me going under. I was alone. I had always been alone, really, since David left. Chloe had filled that void, made me feel like I wasn't just a single mother struggling to keep her head above water. And now she was gone too, replaced by a ghost who haunted my memories. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when Leo shuffled in wearing his pajama pants and a hoodie. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, his hair a mess. He opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents, not really seeing anything. I watched him, my heart aching with a pain that was equal parts love and anger. I wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him it was okay, that we would get through this. But I couldn't, because it wasn't okay. And I didn't know if it ever would be again. He grabbed a carton of orange juice and started drinking straight from the container, a habit I'd been trying to break him of for years. The casualness of it, the sheer normalcy of the gesture was too much. I felt something snap inside me. "Leo," I said, my voice sharp and cold. He froze, the carton halfway to his lips. He slowly lowered it and turned to face me, his expression wary. "What happened, Leo?" I asked. "What happened with you and Chloe?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy and terrible. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Mom," he started, but I cut him off. Don't lie to me. I saw you. I saw everything." The color drained from his face, and I watched him crumble. It was the look of a boy who had just realized there was no escape, that the walls had closed in around him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for you to find out like this." I just stared at him, waiting for an explanation that would never be good enough. "Tell me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Tell me everything." He stood there, frozen in the middle of the kitchen, the orange juice carton still dangling from his fingers. I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard, and I saw the exact moment he decided to stop running. Something shifted in his posture, a subtle deflation, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He set the carton down on the counter and pulled out a chair, sinking into it as if his legs could no longer hold him. I remained standing, my arms crossed over my chest, a barrier between my heart and the words I knew were coming. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, the sound obscenely normal, a soundtrack to the collapse of my world. He ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since he was a toddler, and when he finally looked up at me, his eyes were wet with tears he was trying desperately to hold back. "Mom, sit down please," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. I didn't move. I couldn't sit. Sitting felt like acceptance, like I was making myself comfortable for the story he was about to tell me, and there was nothing comfortable about any of this. "Just talk," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I don't need to be comfortable, I just need to hear it." He nodded, a jerky, frantic movement, and took a deep breath. I watched his chest rise and fall, and I thought about how I'd held that chest when he was a baby, how I'd listened to his heartbeat against my own. The memory was a knife, sharp and painful, and I pushed it away. "It started about 6 months ago," he began, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. "After I turned 18. I was at that party, remember, the one at Tyler's house. Chloe was there." I remembered. Chloe had come with me because she'd been between boyfriends, and I didn't want her to spend a Friday night alone. She'd hung out with the parents while the kids did their own thing in the backyard. I'd left early because I had an early shift the next morning, but Chloe had stayed. She said she wanted to finish her wine and catch up with some of the other parents. I'd thought nothing of it. I'd trusted her. We started talking, Leo continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just talking. She was asking me about school, about my plans for the future. She was nice to me, she always has been." His voice broke on the word nice, and I felt a bitter, hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. Nice. That was what he called it. She had been nice to him, and in return he had given her everything. "I didn't plan it, Mom," he said, finally looking up at me. "I swear to God I didn't, it just happened." She kissed me, in the backyard behind the shed. I was so surprised I didn't know what to do. She just grabbed my face and kissed me, and He trailed off, shame flooding his features. "I kissed her back," he admitted, his voice hollow. "And then she said she had to go and she left. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about it. She was your friend. She was older. It was so wrong, but I couldn't stop." I listened to him, my heart pounding in my ears, and I felt like I was hearing a confession from a stranger. This wasn't my son. My son was a quiet, awkward kid who played video games and blushed when girls looked at him. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been shaped and molded by a predator who had wormed her way into our lives. "The next day she texted me," he said. "She apologized for the kiss, said she was drunk, that it was a mistake, but then she said she'd always thought I was handsome, that I reminded her of Dad." The mention of David sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. "She said she'd had a crush on Dad too, back in the day. Before you and him got together, she said she'd always regretted not doing anything about it." His words were tumbling out now, fast and desperate, like he was trying to get it all out before he lost his nerve. "And then she said that maybe we could. I don't know, just see what happened. Just once. She said it would be our secret. She said no one would ever find out." I closed my eyes, and I saw it all so clearly. Chloe, my best friend, the woman I had cried to about my failed marriage, had been nursing a secret crush on my ex-husband for years. And when she couldn't have him, she'd set her sights on the next best thing. His son, my son. It was a sick, twisted fantasy, A way for her to finally get what she'd always wanted, even if it was only a shadow of the real thing. She told me not to feel guilty, Leo continued, his voice trembling. She said I was an adult. She said it was just fun, that it didn't have to mean anything. But it did mean something, Mom. She made me feel special. She made me feel like I was worth something. His tears were falling freely now, streaks down his cheeks that he didn't bother to wipe away. I know it was wrong. I know she was using me. I knew it the whole time. But I couldn't stop. She'd text me and I'd go to her. She'd call and I'd answer. I felt like I was addicted to her, like I couldn't breathe without her. I listened to him, and a part of me, the mother part, wanted to go to him and hold him. He was still just a boy who'd been manipulated and used by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. But another part of me, the wounded part, couldn't get past the betrayal. He had let her into our lives. He had lied to me day after day while I went about my business, oblivious. He had smiled at me over dinner while secretly texting her under the table. He had hugged me goodnight while planning his next rendezvous with my best friend. The duality of it, the sheer duplicity, was staggering. "Did you ever think about me?" I asked, my voice so quiet I wasn't sure he'd heard me. He looked up, his eyes wide and pleading. "Did you ever think about how this would hurt me, or was I just an obstacle in the way of you and your secret?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. "No, don't answer that. I don't think I can handle your answer right now." I walked over to the window and stared out at the street. The sun was shining, a beautiful Southern California morning, the kind of day that usually made me grateful to be alive. But today, the light felt harsh and accusatory, exposing every crack in my carefully constructed life. I thought about Chloe and the years of friendship I'd given her. I thought about all the times I'd defended her, vouched for her, loved her like a sister. I thought about the way she'd been there for me during the divorce, and I wondered if she'd been there for me out of genuine affection, or if she'd just been waiting for her moment. Waiting for Leo to grow up so she could finally get what she wanted. The thought made me feel sick, used, hollowed out from the inside. "Did she ever tell you about me?" I asked, turning back to face him. "Did she ever say anything about our friendship? Or was that just a convenient cover for her to get close to you?" Leo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a childish gesture that made him look so young, so vulnerable. "She said you were a good friend," he admitted, his voice small. "She said she cared about you. She said she didn't want to hurt you." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, dry and humorless. "Did she? Because I think that ship has sailed, don't you?" He flinched at my words, and I felt a small, vindictive satisfaction. It was petty, and I knew it, but I couldn't help it. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain that was burning a hole in my chest. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted you to find out like this. I was going to end it. I was going to tell her it was over, and I was going to tell you everything. I didn't know how. I was scared." His words were genuine, I could see that. He was terrified not just of losing me but of losing himself. He had been caught in a trap of his own making, and he didn't know how to get out. But his fear didn't excuse what he'd done. It didn't erase the images that were seared into my brain. "I need you to understand something," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. You broke my trust, Leo. You broke my heart, and I don't know how to fix that." He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know," he whispered. "I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just don't want to lose you. You're all I have, Mom. You're the only person who's ever really been there for me." His words cut through me like a blade, and I felt my carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. I walked over to the table and sat down across from him, my legs finally giving out. I reached across and took his hand, and I felt him flinch at my touch, like he was expecting me to push him away. "I'm not going to abandon you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're my son, you'll always be my son, but this is going to take time. I need to process this. I need to figure out how to move forward." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. "I'll go to therapy. I'll stay away from her. I'll do anything." The mention of Chloe sent a fresh wave of anger through me. She was the real villain here. She was the one who had taken advantage of my son, who had manipulated him, who had betrayed our friendship. And she was out there, somewhere, probably going about her life like nothing had happened while my world was in ruins. I couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't just move on and pretend she didn't exist. She needed to pay. But how? How do you make someone pay for destroying your life? I didn't have the answers. All I had was a burning, consuming rage that threatened to swallow me whole. I'm going to talk to her, I said, my voice flat. Leo's eyes widened in alarm. Mom, no, please don't. It's not going to help. It's just going to make things worse. Worse, I repeated, my voice rising. Worse than this? How could it possibly get worse than this? He flinched at my tone, and I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I need to confront her, Leo. I need to look her in the eye and tell her what she's done, for my own closure, for my own sanity. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. This isn't up for debate. I'm doing this, whether you like it or not. He lowered his head, defeated, and I felt a small pang of guilt. He was still just a kid, and I was dragging him into something he wasn't ready for. But I couldn't stop. I needed to see Chloe. I needed to hear her side of the story, even if it was nothing but lies. I stood up from the table and grabbed my keys. Leo watched me, his eyes full of fear and regret. Mom, please, he begged. Don't do this. But I was already walking out the door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might have lost my nerve. And I needed my nerve. I needed all the anger and the hurt and the betrayal to fuel me, to get me through what I was about to do. I got in my car and started driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The streets of Silver Lake blurred past me, familiar landmarks that suddenly felt alien and strange. Everything was different now. Everything had changed. And I was about to make it even worse. I pulled up to Chloe's apartment building, a sleek modern complex in West Hollywood that she'd always been so proud of. I'd been here 100 times, for dinner parties and wine nights and lazy Sunday mornings. It had always felt like a second home. Now it felt like a fortress, a place where the enemy was hiding behind the walls. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the entrance, trying to work up the courage to go inside. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty, and I felt like I was going to be sick. But I couldn't turn back. I had come this far, I needed to see it through. I got out of the car and walked to the door, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I punched in her code, the one she'd given me years ago, and the door clicked open. I walked up the stairs, my legs trembling, and I stood outside her door. I took a deep breath and I knocked. She opened the door, and I saw her face change from surprise to confusion to something else, something that looked almost like fear. Laura, she said, her voice uncertain. What are you doing here? I pushed past her into the apartment, my eyes scanning the room. It was exactly the same as it always was, clean and stylish, with her art prints on the walls and her designer furniture arranged just so. It was the home of a woman who had everything under control, except she didn't. I turned to face her, and I felt the rage boiling over inside me. You know why I'm here, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You know exactly why I'm here. She closed the door and leaned against it, her arms crossed over her chest in a defensive gesture. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice was shaky and I could see the guilt in her eyes. Don't, I said, my voice rising. Don't you dare lie to me. I saw you. I saw you with my son, in his bedroom, stripped bare, touching him. I saw everything. Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks like water from a sink. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment she was frozen, trapped in the headlights of my accusation. And then something in her shifted. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. She straightened up, uncrossed her arms, and met my gaze with a steady, unflinching stare. Fine, she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. You want to talk about it, let's talk about it, but you're not going to like what you hear. She walked past me into her living room and sat down on her expensive white couch, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap like she was about to give a presentation. I followed her, standing in the center of the room, my arms crossed over my chest. I'm listening, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. Chloe sighed, a long theatrical exhale, and looked up at me with an expression that was almost pitying. You want to know the truth? She said. The truth is, I've been waiting for this for a long time, not the confrontation. I knew that was inevitable, but Leo. I've been waiting for Leo. I felt the floor drop out from under me. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I'm talking about your husband, she said, her eyes gleaming with a cold malice I'd never seen before. Your ex-husband, David, I loved him, Laura, I loved him long before you even met him, but he chose you, he always chose you, and when he left you I thought, finally, it's my turn. But he didn't want me either, he never wanted me, so I had to settle for the next best thing. She paused, a cruel smile playing at the corners of her mouth. His son, your son, the perfect combination of the man I loved and the woman I hate. I stood there in her pristine living room, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't seen coming. She hated me. All this time, all those years of friendship, of shared secrets and late-night conversations, she had hated me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to brace myself against the back of her designer armchair to keep from falling. Chloe watched me with that cold, calculating smile, her eyes glittering with a satisfaction that made my blood run cold. She had been playing the long game, waiting for her moment, and she had finally found it. I was the villain in her story, the woman who had stolen the man she loved, and she had spent years plotting her revenge. My son was just a pawn in her twisted little game, a tool she'd used to finally get back at me for crime I hadn't even known I'd committed. You're insane, I said, my voice shaking. You're absolutely insane. Chloe laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the walls of her perfect apartment. Am I? She asked, tilting her head to the side like a curious bird. Or am I just the only one who's honest about what they want? You've been living in this bubble, Laura, this fantasy world where everyone loves you and everything is fine. But it's not fine. It's never been fine. You took everything from me, David, our friendship, even my dignity. I was always the second choice, the consolation prize, the one you'd call when you had nothing better to do, and I was sick of it. She stood up and walked over to her window, her back to me, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. So when Leo turned 18, I saw my chance. He was so eager, so desperate for attention. It was almost too easy. All I had to do was tell him he was special, tell him he reminded me of his father, and he was putty in my hands. I felt a surge of rage so powerful that it blurred my vision. I wanted to lunge at her, to wrap my hands around her throat and squeeze until she couldn't breathe. But I forced myself to stay still, to keep control. If I let her get to me, she would win. And I was not going to let her win. You're a predator, I said, my voice low and venomous. You manipulated a child, my child. You took advantage of him because you were too pathetic to get what you wanted any other way. Chloe spun around, her eyes flashing with anger. He's not a child, she snapped. He's 18, he's an adult, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he wanted it, he wanted me. She stepped closer to me, her face inches from mine. You can hate me all you want, Laura, you can blame me for everything. But the truth is, your son made a choice. He chose me over you. And that's what really hurts, isn't it? The words hit me like a knife, sharp and precise, aimed at the most vulnerable part of my heart. She was right, that was the worst part of it. Leo had made a choice. He had looked at Chloe, a woman who had been a part of our lives for years, and he had chosen her. He had lied to me, hidden from me, betrayed me, all for a woman who was using him. The thought was unbearable, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I stepped back from her, my legs unsteady, and I felt the tears starting to well up in my eyes. I had held them back for so long, forced them down with every ounce of strength I had, but they were finally breaking through. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why did you do this to me? After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you. Chloe's expression softened, just slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that cold, hard mask she'd been wearing all along. Because I wanted you to feel what I felt, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I wanted you to know what it's like to lose everything. I wanted you to understand how it feels to be the one left behind. She walked back to the couch and sat down, her composure fully restored. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I don't even want you to, I just wanted you to know the truth, to finally see me for who I really am. I stared at her, this woman I had loved like a sister, and I felt a profound sense of loss. The Chloe I knew was gone. She had never really existed. She had been a mask, a carefully constructed facade designed to hide the bitter, resentful woman underneath. And I had fallen for it. I had trusted her. I had opened my heart to her, and she had used that trust to destroy me. I turned and walked to the door, my hand on the handle. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I couldn't look at her for another second. Laura, she called out, her voice suddenly softer. I am sorry, not for what I did, but for how it ended. I never wanted you to find out like this. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. If I turned around, I might have said something I regretted, or worse, I might have broken down completely. Instead, I opened the door and walked out, letting it close behind me with a soft click. The hallway was quiet, and I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had gotten what I came for. I had confronted her, heard her confession, and seen the truth with my own eyes. But it didn't feel like closure. It felt like an open wound, bleeding and raw, and I didn't know how to stop it from hurting. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the conversation, dissecting every word. The traffic on the 101 was a blur, the familiar exits passing by without me really seeing them. I was going through the motions, my body on autopilot while my mind was still stuck in that apartment, still staring at Chloe's cold, hateful eyes. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the street. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my front door, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Leo was in there, waiting for me, probably pacing the floor in a state of panic. I didn't know what I was going to say to him. I didn't know how to bridge the gap that had opened up between us. Eventually, I got out of the car and walked to the front door. I unlocked it and stepped inside, and the first thing I saw was Leo sitting on the couch, his face pale and drawn, his hands clasped together like he was praying. He jumped up when he saw me, his eyes searching my face for a sign of what had happened. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling. "Are you okay? What did she say?" I closed the door behind me and walked past him into the living room. I didn't sit down. I just stood there, my arms crossed over my chest, staring at him. "She told me everything," I said, my voice flat. "She told me about David, about how she's been in love with him for years, about how she wanted revenge." Leo's face went white, and he sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew she was using me, I just didn't want to believe it." I sat down on the armchair across from him, my legs finally giving out. "You knew she was using you, and you went along with it anyway?" I asked, my voice heavy with disappointment. Leo looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I didn't want to lose her, Mom. She was the only person who made me feel like I mattered, like I was good enough. Everyone else, including you, always saw me as a kid, but she saw me as a man." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I had always tried to be a good mother, to support him and love him and protect him. But somewhere along the way, I had missed something. I had failed to make him feel valued, and someone else had filled that void. "I know I messed up," he continued, his voice cracking. "I know I betrayed you, but I didn't know how to stop. She was like a drug. Every time I tried to walk away, she pulled me back in. She made me feel like I needed her." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say." I stared at him, this boy who was so much more than a boy, who had been manipulated and used by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a tool for revenge. And I felt a wave of compassion wash over me, cutting through the anger and the hurt. He was a victim too. He had been preyed upon, seduced by someone who knew exactly how to exploit his insecurities. He wasn't innocent, not by a long shot, but he wasn't the villain of this story. He was just another casualty. I got up and walked over to him, and I sat down on the couch beside him. He looked at me, his eyes wide and uncertain, and I reached out and took his hand. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt," I said, my voice soft. "It hurts more than anything I've ever felt, but I'm not going to lose you, Leo. You're my son. You're the most important person in my life, and we're going to get through this together." He broke down then, sobbing into my shoulder, and I held him like I hadn't held him since he was a little boy, rocking him back and forth while he cried. The tears fell freely from my own eyes, a release I hadn't allowed myself to have until that moment. We sat there for a long time, holding each other, two broken people trying to find a way to heal. In the days that followed, we started the slow, painful process of rebuilding our lives. Leo started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma and manipulation. He was reluctant at first, but eventually he opened up, and I could see the weight starting to lift from his shoulders. He talked about Chloe, about how she had made him feel, about the shame and the guilt that had been eating him alive, and he started to understand that what had happened wasn't his fault. He had been a victim, and he deserved to heal. I started seeing a therapist too, because I realized that I couldn't carry this burden alone. I needed to process the betrayal, to understand how I had let someone so toxic into our lives, and I needed to forgive myself for the things I hadn't seen, the signs I had missed. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger would boil over, days when I would look at Leo and see Chloe's hand on his thigh, and I would have to walk away before I said something I regretted. But those days became fewer, and the good days started to outnumber the bad. We talked more, Leo and I, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. He told me about his fears, his insecurities, his hopes for the future. And I listened, really listened, without judgment or criticism. I made a conscious effort to see him as the adult he was becoming, not the child I still wanted him to be. It was a shift that took effort, but it was necessary. He needed to know that I respected him, that I saw him as a man capable of making his own decisions, even the bad ones. As for Chloe, I cut her out of my life completely. I blocked her number, unfriended her on social media, and returned the key to her apartment in the mail with a note that simply said goodbye. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. I didn't give her any more of my time or energy. She had taken enough from me already. A few months later, I heard through mutual friends that she had moved to New York, a fresh start, she called it. I didn't care. She was dead to me. I had moved on. I had to. It's been 2 years now since that day, the day I came home early and found my world in ruins. Leo is 20, a sophomore in college, studying engineering. He's doing well, making friends, dating a girl his own age who seems to genuinely care about him. He still has moments of guilt, moments when he looks at me with those sad, apologetic eyes, and I have to remind him that I've forgiven him, that we've both moved on. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's real. It's built on honesty and trust, and a shared understanding that we are stronger than the thing that tried to tear us apart. I still think about Chloe sometimes. I think about the years of friendship that were built on a lie, the memories that are now tainted by the truth. I think about how she saw me as her enemy when all I ever wanted was to be her friend. And I feel a profound sadness, not for her, but for myself. For the time I wasted on someone who was never worthy of my love. But I'm not bitter anymore. The rage has faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Some people are just broken. Some people will hurt you because they've been hurt themselves. And the only thing you can do is protect yourself and move on. I look at Leo now, sitting across from me at the dinner table, laughing at something on his phone. He's so young, so full of life and potential. He's made mistakes, some of them big, some of them devastating, but he's also learned from them. He's grown, and I am so proud of the man he's becoming. What are you looking at? He asks, catching my eye. I smile, shaking my head. Nothing, just happy you're here. He grins, that lopsided smile that reminds me so much of his father, and I feel a warmth spread through my chest. The past is the past. The future is what matters. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see what it brings.
যে যাবার সে যাবে চলে, তারে নিয়া ভাইবো না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। যে যাবার সে যাবে চলে, তারে নিয়া ভাইবো না, তারে নিয়া ভাবলেই বাড়বে কষ্ট যন্ত্রণা। এত ভালোবাসার পরেও পাইলাম না তার মন, আমারে সারিয়া বেইমান ধরছে আরেকজন। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে দিয়া। হাত বান্ধিব, পা বান্ধিব, মন বান্ধিব কি দিয়া, একটা মন তার 12 জনকে রাখছে রে। তোর কারণে শেষ করিলাম ইহকাল আর পরকাল, তোর কারণে শেষ করিলাম ইহকাল আর পরকাল। কে জানিত হবে এমন
পুরিবে কপাল আমার, কে জানিত হবে এমন পুরিবে কপাল।